Coming up on Primetime News, nearly 200 international historians urge Japan to apologize for its past wartime atrocities. At the same time, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe ramps up efforts to convince UNESCO to add the country's wartime facilities to the World Heritage List. President Park Geun-hye calls for drastic deregulations to boost the number of youth jobs and lure more foreign investment. And no preconditions for exploratory denuclearization talks with Pyongyang. That is, according to South Korea's top nuclear envoy, who says the 5 members of the stalled 6-party talks are ready to restart a conversation. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome to Primetime News on this Wednesday, May 6th. I'm Hwang Ji-hye.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us.
We begin with the latest on Korea's pension reform efforts.
Now, despite earlier agreements, the rival parties have failed to pass a bill overhauling the civil servant pension system on Wednesday, the last day of the Assembly's extraordinary session. Last weekend, it looked like the ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy were united on reforms that would require public servants to pay higher premiums while working and receive reduced payouts during retirement.
However, the opposition was expecting the vote to include a bill to reform the national pension system, a separate government-run pension scheme for the general public. Ultimately, NPAD lawmakers refused to vote, blaming the ruling party for changing the terms to exclude those national pension reforms. Now, Korea plans to hold talks with Japan as part of efforts to thwart Tokyo's bid to list several wartime industrial facilities as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. An official at Seoul's Foreign Ministry said Wednesday that the meeting will take place this month, although an exact date has not been fixed yet. This comes after the International Council on Monuments and Sites reportedly approved 23 industrial zones in Japan as possible UNESCO sites. Those include 7 facilities where some 58,000 Koreans were forced into hard labor during the Japanese colonial era. Tokyo-based broadcaster TV Asahi reported Tuesday that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is sending handwritten appeals to UNESCO member countries in an effort to make sure the sites are listed. The 21-member World Heritage Committee will make a final decision at the end of June. And as Japan pushes its version of history, nearly 200 scholars from around the world have released a joint statement to urge Japan to face up to its wartime atrocities. They say the country's attempts to whitewash history will only draw more international attention to the issue. Hwang Ji-hye has this report.
187 international historians are calling on Japan to apologize for its wartime sexual enslavement of women. In a joint statement on Wednesday, the scholars said it's simply unacceptable for Japan to deny or trivialize its actions. More than 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese military during Japan's colonial rule of Korea in the mid-1900s. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been facing heavy criticism for backtracking on Tokyo's past apologies to the victims, denying the government's involvement in the recruitment of the women. Just a week ago, Abe ignored calls from the international community and refused to apologize to the so-called comfort women in his U.S. Congress address. In his attempts to whitewash history, Abe has relied in part on a lack of concrete evidence. The scholars pointed out that important evidence also comes from the testimony of victims. Wednesday's joint appeal follows a similar statement issued by 20 U.S. scholars in February. Professor Alexis Dutton from University of Connecticut, who led the move, noted in an earlier interview that such denials will raise more international awareness about the issue.
Right? It's not going to silence people either inside Japan or anywhere in the world, because that's not how questioning, thinking, research works. everybody's going to want to know more.
With the statement also sent to the Japanese leader, the focus now is on whether Abe will offer anything more in his statement on the 70th anniversary of the war's end. But most doubt he will have a change of heart by August. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
And it's not just historians. A senior Chinese political leader is also pressuring the Japanese prime minister to face his country's past wrongdoings. Japan's Kyodo News Agency reports China's top legislator Chang Do-jang told a group of Japanese lawmakers on Tuesday that Abe's August speech marking the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II should be acceptable to China and the global community. The news agency says the official's statement suggests that Abe should include an apology in his speech. In his address to the U.S. Congress last month, Abe acknowledged Japan had caused suffering in the region, but he chose not to offer a new apology to the 200,000 women forced into sexual slavery.
A possible breakthrough in the deadlock on denuclearization talks with North Korea. South Korea's special representative for Korean Peninsula affairs has been meeting with his counterparts in the U.S. and China and has announced some progress on the long-stalled six-party talks. Our Kim Hyun-bin tells us more.
South Korea's top nuclear envoy says there are no preconditions to resuming talks with North Korea on its nuclear program in order to test the regime's commitment before resuming formal six-party negotiations. Park Geun-hye made the remarks after wrapping up talks with his U.S. counterpart Sung Kim in Washington on Tuesday.
These talks would be aimed at judging Pyongyang's real intentions and finding out whether it will make a sincere commitment to denuclearize.
When asked whether the proposal had been conveyed to North Korea, Hwang said they had not received a direct response from Pyongyang. He did mention, however, that the North had responded in an indirect manner through its state media, which so far has been less than receptive to the idea. China has been pushing the idea of holding unconditional exploratory talks with North Korea for the past few years. Beijing thinks it could be a stepping stone to resuming the long-stalled six-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea. Those talks, not held since late 2008, involve the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia. The exploratory talks meet both Pyongyang's demand for an unconditional resumption of talks and Washington's insistence for talks to resume only after North Korea takes concrete measures to denuclearize. Looking to coordinate their two approaches, the South Korean envoy arrived in Beijing on Wednesday to hold talks with his Chinese counterpart, Wu Da-wei. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Let's focus on the regime's young leader now. Flying around the world is part of the job for most world leaders, but this isn't the case for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, who hasn't left the country since coming to power in 2011. A U.S.-based expert on North Korea says Kim's decision to scrap plans to visit Russia this month shows the young leader is not confident enough to leave town for a day or two, as is yet to cement his grip on power. Our Connie Kim reports on the young leader's insecurities.
Concern over his ability to exercise control over the North Korean regime may have been the reason behind Kim Jong-un's decision to cancel his planned trip to Russia this weekend. This is the view of Van Jackson, a North Korea expert at the Center for a New American Security. He made the remarks during a discussion held at Johns Hopkins University in Washington on Tuesday. Jackson said he never expected Kim to actually make the trip to Moscow, as the young leader feels insecure of his position. He said that if Kim was entirely comfortable with his grip on power, he wouldn't have executed senior officials and he would feel able to leave North Korea to attend events in other countries. Russia had repeatedly said Kim had confirmed his attendance to the May 9th event, which will mark the 70th anniversary of the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. It was only last week that a spokesperson for the Kremlin said Kim had decided to stay in Pyongyang because of internal affairs. The U.S. expert also expressed concern over North Korea's massive stockpile of ballistic missiles, saying South Korea's current missile defense systems are not strong enough to cope with the threat. Jackson said deploying the U.S. missile defense system, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, otherwise known as THAAD, would go a long way to nullify the threat posed by Pyongyang's ballistic missiles. China has raised strong objections to the possible deployment of THAAD to the Korean peninsula, saying it could also be used to monitor mainland China. Jackson rejected Beijing's concerns, saying THAAD's radar could only detect missiles coming into the Korean peninsula. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye led a ministers' meeting on her deregulation drive, the third of its kind, earlier today. She called for increased efforts to tear down excessive regulations, a key component of her economic policy. We turn to our Choi Yoo-sun for more.
President Park Geun-hye says the government is planning to focus on ensuring the public and businesses are satisfied with her deregulation drive.
우리가 규제에 묶여 있는 동안 다른 경쟁국들은 발빠르게 움직이고 있습니다. 이제 우리도 경제 회복과 청년 일자리 창출을 위해서 보다 과감한 규제 개혁에 나서야 하겠습니다.
The president took note of efforts to address the most pressing deregulatory tasks and better gauge the public's concerns. However, she also urged officials to tailor the proposed reforms to more effectively benefit the related parties and said Korea's regulatory system should be revised to meet global standards. She added that while alternatives to regulation should be considered, new regulations need to maximize the private sector's autonomy. This year, the government announced a series of new reform measures. For the first time in more than 40 years, the government will ease regulations on greenbelt management initially implemented to prevent urban overpopulation and to preserve the environment. The Land Ministry says it will allow the construction of facilities to manufacture and sell indigenous products on greenbelts to boost the income of area residents. Restrictions on restaurant and housing construction will also be eased. Officials say the deregulatory actions will focus on reducing inconveniences for residents while striking a balance between development and preserving the environment. In a move to catch up with advanced countries like the US and Japan, the Korean government will adjust regulations to permit test drives of driverless cars with the goal of commercializing them by 2020. The government also plans to offer greater support in the areas of infrastructure and technological development. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News.
And today, economy-related ministries announced plans to lift regulations seeking to foster growth engines through foreign investment. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Korea is gaining recognition as an attractive investment destination. But even as more investors acknowledge Korea's importance, they also say there is plenty of room for improvement. According to a survey by the Korean Chamber of Commerce, more than half of the foreign investors surveyed said Korea has increased in significance, especially after it agreed on a free trade pact with China. However, they also said the investment environment is not any more favorable than before. That is why Seoul is working to remove regulations and open doors to more investment. With the new deregulation package, Seoul is seeking to attract $30 billion in investment by 2017, a marked increase from the $19 billion record set last year. Starting next month, and for the first 2 years since their founding in Korea, companies with foreign investment will no longer have to limit the number of foreign employees to less than 20% of the workforce. In addition, foreign startups seeking to register a business will soon face less paperwork. The lifting of other regulations will give foreign companies opportunities to develop medical cosmetics and own airport maintenance services. In addition to easing regulations for foreign investors, the government will work toward fostering new growth engines on the domestic front by supporting the convergence of industries like healthcare and financial technologies. As a first step, the related ministries will help startups expedite the process of turning their ideas into products. The latest set of deregulation moves is aimed at improving efficiency and creating a greater synergy effect among government ministries and agencies. To do that, the government plans to remove redundant processes and emphasize collaboration. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Let's move on to other stories. The average Korean worker is bringing home wages that are well above the OECD average, and the after-tax amount puts Koreans even higher in the group, meaning the tax burden in Korea is not as heavy as in other member countries. According to the OECD's latest taxing wages report, Korea had the 14th highest annual income before taxes last year at $46,664 among the 34 member nations. That's well above the OECD average of $41,000. Korea fell between Japan and Sweden. Switzerland topped the list with over $66,000, followed by Luxembourg and Norway. Korea's annual income after taxes is just over $40,000, bumping it up to 6th place in the rankings behind Australia and the Netherlands. Korean shipbuilders retained the top spot for 3 straight months. Winning the largest amount of new orders last month certainly did help. According to London-based Clarkson Research Services, during the month of April, Korean shipbuilders won new orders totaling 533,000 compensated gross tons, a widely used indicator to measure the amount of work necessary to build a ship. The Korean shipbuilders were followed by shipbuilders from China and Japan, but by a wide margin during the same period. In particular, shipbuilders from China produced less than 300,000 compensated gross tons in April, their lowest monthly output in 6 years. And Korea has become a hot travel destination in recent years, thanks largely to government efforts to improve the tourism sector.
That's right, and the government has designated May 1st to May 14th Spring Tourism Week, where travel-related discounts and promotions are offered to encourage people to travel around the country.
We had our Kim Ji-yeon sitting down with Dr. William Hunter from Kyunghee University's College of Hotel and Tourism Management to hear his thoughts on the program.
Let's talk about my first question. Is Spring Tourism Week was designated by the government to boost the local economy. It's part of its creative economy initiative. How important is this to the local economy?
It's very important, and we have these sort of events, these mega events, such as Tourism Week, which is fantastic, and we don't need to be anxious about are we going to get our return on the dollar today? Probably not. But in the long run, when we're talking about brand image, absolutely.
Comparing to other countries, is there any other country that the government takes initiative making a Tourism Week mega event to boost tourism along with using technology?
It seems to me that Korea is on the cutting edge. Korea is out there in front, taking risks, because it's not an easy thing to do this. It's a risky situation because what you invest in is not necessarily what you're going to get back in the short run. Also, in addition, not only do we have the Tourism Week, we also have the Park Geun-hye has pushed this initiative for the smart tourism, virtual reality, VR, augmented reality, AR, and pushing this internet, smartphone related technology to push tourism. For example, you can download a new app. It's called Blinking Soul, created by our university. And you download Blinking Soul and you say, okay, well, what hotel do I want to stay in? What restaurant do I want to eat in? And you input your data, and it's going to give you GPS coordinates. It's going to give you a map. It's going to point the way.
Let's talk about progress then. How many foreign tourists visit Korea in a year? And how much?
I think we're 11 million, I think, international tourists. And I think back in 2004, when I first came to Korea, I think the number was more like 6 million. So we've gone from 6 million to 11 million, which is almost double.
Well, thank you for your time, Dr. Hunter.
And for more top international headlines, we connect to Polly at the News Center.
Our focus today, the U.S. offers a bounty for the leaders of the Islamic State group. Britain braces for the closest election in a generation. And in sports, after losing the fight of the century, Manny the Pac-Man Pacquiao is under fire for an undeclared injury.
Paul, let's begin in Washington. The United States has been leading the war against IS militants across Iraq and Syria, and now it's looking to ramp up the pressure on the group's leadership.
That's right. The State Department announced on Tuesday that it added 4 individuals to its most wanted list as part of its so-called Rewards for Justice program. Bounties of up to $7 million are being offered for any information leading to the capture of these high-value targets. In the meantime, U.S. investigators are looking into a claim by the jihadist group that it was behind a failed attack in Texas on Sunday.
This is still under investigation by the FBI and other members of the intelligence community to determine any ties or affiliations that these 2 individuals may have had with ISIL or other terrorist organizations around the world. So it's too early to say at this point. The thing that we can say definitively is that because of the quick and professional and brave work of local law enforcement officers, an attempted terrorist attack was foiled.
2 gunmen from Arizona were fatally shot by police in Garland, Texas, after they opened fire on a controversial contest to draw cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. This is the first time IS has claimed responsibility for an attack on American soil. And heading now to Britain, the country's top political leaders are wrapping up their last day of campaigning on the eve of what has been described as the closest election in a generation. Voters nationwide will head to polling stations on Thursday, with political watchers anticipating a hung parliament. The 2 biggest camps, the Conservative Party and the opposition Labour group, have been neck and neck in polls running up to the highly anticipated vote. Incumbent Prime Minister David Cameron warned that a rival coalition government would hurt the economy.
They want to hold the government to ransom, vote by vote, budget by budget, measure by measure, and everyone in this country would pay the bill for that in the form of higher taxes, higher interest rates, and fewer jobs. It's something we've got to stop, and we can if we get those 23 seats.
Labour leader Ed Miliband has ruled out the prospect of a coalition with smaller parties that have been playing a growing role in British politics. With no clear winner in sight, Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg has said that Britain could be forced to hold a second election before Christmas. And finally, 2 boxing fans in the U.S. have delivered a blow to Manny Pacquiao, filing a lawsuit that accuses him of lying about a shoulder injury before his fight with Floyd Mayweather last Saturday. The class action suit argues fans were defrauded of millions of dollars after paying to watch and bet on the bout. After losing the match, the Filipino boxer revealed that he would be having a surgery on his right shoulder. However, he and his team maintained that he was upfront about his condition, even though he failed to mention it on a pre-fight questionnaire. Medical experts say it may have hurt his performance in the ring.
A healthy individual, he knows when he tears his rotator cuff. From the media reports I've read, it happened 2 to 3 weeks before the fight in a sparring session. They recognized an event, he felt pain and had some impairment and had some difficulty from that point forward. In fact, they changed the way he was going to fight in order to compensate for whatever deficiencies he had in his arm strength.
If he's found guilty of perjury, Pacquiao could be given a jail sentence of between 1 and 4 years and a fine of up to $5,000. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
According to traditional East Asian calendars, today marks Ipa, the start of summer. So it was fitting that the whole nation experienced relatively warm conditions with highs in the 20s, and tomorrow should be warmer than today. The air quality will remain decent, but keep an eye on the UV index with all that sunshine. Also, some of the coastal regions could wake up to foggy conditions tomorrow morning, so drive with extra caution if you're there. On that note, let's take a closer look at the readings for tomorrow. Seoul and Busan will reach highs of 23 and 22, while Daegu and Gwangju will be warmer, hitting 28 and 27 respectively. And as for the other regions, it seems like Daejeon and Jeju Island will top out at 25 and 20, while Dokdo rises to 19. Although summer is approaching and temperatures are climbing, keep in mind that there are still big gaps between the daytime highs and morning and evening lows. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
train aficionado once said that smaller the train, more concentrated the fun. Well, we've come to the end of our newscast. Thank you so much for staying with us. This has been Daniel Choy.
And I'm Hwang Ji-hye. Please join us at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye for now.